This meeting is being recorded.
I'm going to mute apologies really quickly. So, hi everyone, thank you so much for your patience, and good to have you here. Please grab some food and sign in. And yeah, today we have Valeh Valiollah for Amiri, and Valeh is a research engineer in the Yosef lab. She works on the analysis of multimodal single-cell datasets, specifically using deep generative models. Prior to this, she was a software engineer with Microsoft, working on file synchronization in Redmond. And she got her double master's in computer engineering and embedded systems from Columbia University of the City of New York and Telecom Paris Tech in Paris. So give a welcome to Valeh. Thanks, Valeh.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry for the delay. So today I'm going to talk to you about GitHub Actions so that you can automate much of what you do and not end up like Charlie Chaplin here. So quick agenda. So first I'll give you an overview of sort of what GitHub Actions are and why you might want to use them. I'll then give you a live demo. And finally, I'll talk about certain use cases of GitHub Actions that might be interesting in your research. So overview of GitHub Actions, which I'll be referring to as GHA in what follows. So why do we even use GitHub Actions? It's actually pretty simple. It's to streamline DevOps pipelines and automate CI/CD build, test, and deployment steps. So that's why we use GitHub Actions. But yeah, I guess that's not very helpful. Even to me, that may be a little bit cryptic. So let me try again. So originally, GitHub Actions were conceived to automate parts of the software development process. And they're used heavily by application and package developers, but it goes beyond that, and we'll see, a lot of use cases that it can have very broad use cases. So in a nutshell, you can think of it as something like this. So it's something that can do things based on relevant events, and this is intentionally vague. It will become more clear in the following slides. Something is something that we'll dive more into in the next slides, where I will explain what GHA is. Things is kind of pretty much anything that you can think about. So the sky is the limit here. It can go from adding a label to any issue that someone creates in your repository to even like compiling a Jupyter notebook and then or Jupyter book and then publishing it to a site server. Events is the occurrence of relevant activities within your repository, but it can also be purely chronological. Like let's say every week you want to launch a workflow. All of this will become more clear in a bit. So what exactly is GitHub Actions? So it's basically an ecosystem of tools that help you automatically launch workflows based on certain signals of your choosing. So enough with the words. Let's look at a step-by-step diagram. So everything starts with an event. Once that event happens, something, just think of it as a black box, this part doesn't matter, goes and triggers a workflow that is interested in that event, that is sort of like subscribed to that event. And there's the workflow. A workflow is basically a series of jobs, each of which is a series of steps, each of which is a series of actions. Think of an action as a task that you might want to run. So it's actually pretty simple. And here we can see that the workflow is like subscribed to this event. And then the workflows run on a runner, which is basically a computer, a machine that hosts multiple of these, that can run multiple of these workflows at a time. The runner can be GitHub hosted, or you can have your self-hosted runners. So that's kind of like the big picture. And then I've highlighted here in red sort of the big words to take away. So now let's dive into the high-level properties of some of the GitHub Actions elements, starting with workflows. Workflows are kind of like the meat of the GitHub Actions ecosystem. That's kind of like where everything is declared. So they define relevant events that trigger them and the jobs that they run once they're triggered. Concretely, a workflow is nothing but a YAML file under this directory on your repository. You can have more than one workflow. For example, you can have one workflow that tests your code every time you push to a certain branch. You can have another workflow that does something completely different, like it sends like hi or thank you or something to each person that opens an issue in your repository. Workflows can be nested in the sense that one workflow can call another one and they can be reused. And then I just wanted to tell you about the concept of starter workflows because they're very helpful. So they're basically, there's a host of GitHub provider starter workflows that are basically kind of like templates. And we'll see that in the demo, but it's basically like you take the template and then you can just like customize it based on what you actually want your workflow to do. So as I said, there's a host of GitHub provider workflows, but there's also like your organization can define starter workflows that are interesting to it. So like, let's say your lab or something can define these templates for like newcomers or even existing members. Okay, next, events. So events, we talked about it, they trigger workflows. They are based on relevant stimuli, which can be like an activity within your repository, or it can just be time based on a set schedule. Workflows can also be triggered manually within the GitHub UI. There's a specific event for that. And there's a lot of flexibility in defining events. So you can use like subtypes of activities. Like you can say, oh, I'm interested on issue events, but only if there is an issue that's opened or labeled. I'm not interested if the issue is deleted, for example. And then similarly, you can use what's called filters. Like you can say, I'm interested in pushes to only like the main branch or to branches that start with release /. And then you can even exclude certain expressions. Like, yeah, I'm interested in pushes to all release branches, but not in those that end in -alpha. So you have a lot of flexibility. And then as if that was not enough, you can even go further for even more flexibility, and you can fine tune using event properties. So you can see the event as an event is basically an object that you can access using a github.event. And then you can say, oh, I'm interested in a creation of a label only if the name of that label is but only if the name of that label is bug, then only do I want to actually trigger my workflow. So you can do kind of pretty much anything. Now let's talk about the jobs and steps, which are the meat of the workflow. So workflow is basically one or more jobs. A job is a set of steps that run on the same machine, on the same runner. A step is like a task, so it can be a command, a script, or an action. And by the way, just a quick aside, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt. I did not mention that. And then I just want to tell you about job concurrency, which you may not need, but it's good to know that by default, all jobs run in parallel, possibly on different runners. But you can say, if you want, you can declare dependencies between your jobs by using the needs keyword. So you can say, oh, this like deployment job needs the build job to be done first. And then you can sort of do the opposite by defining concurrency groups. So you can say, and N of my jobs are in the same concurrent group, so please don't run them in parallel, serialize them. And then job matrices is another thing that is very helpful, particularly for continuous integration types of workflows that I'll talk about later. But basically, you can say that, oh, I want my workflow to run on, like, pointing here is tricky, but I want my workflow to run on this matrix of combinations of OS versions and Python versions. And matrices don't have to be Python and OS versions, but the idea is that you want a simple way to declare to GitHub Actions that you want your workflow to run on combinations of properties, sort of, or versions here. And then you can even go one step further and say, oh, I want to run my workflow on this matrix, but I don't want that to run on that particular combination right there. You can also using the exclude keyword, and you can also do the same using the include keyword by saying, oh, I want this matrix plus this one other case as well. So again, a lot of flexibility there too. Okay, runners. This is pretty simple. So runners are basically a machine that your workflow runs on. Runs on is a keyword that you use to declare where your workflow runs. You can run one job per machine at a time. Fresh virtual environment for each workflow. And then there is, of course, a bunch of OS versions available at any given time that you can access at that link. Here, I've just put a screenshot of what's available at this time. And if you want, you can also self-host your runners. So let's say you want an OS version that GitHub doesn't provide, or you have a custom hardware, you can use your own machines. And there's really good guides out there for how to do that. All right, so actions. So I mentioned this briefly previously. So an action is sort of the code that steps within a job execute, but an action is typically more involved than a script. So think of it like a mini application, sort of. So for example, you can use an action to set up a Python environment or a Node.js environment, or you can use an action to set up authentication to a cloud provider, or run code coverage on your code and then upload the results to wherever you want to upload them. There is a community-driven actions marketplace, which is awfully convenient because you can find pretty much anything you search for out there. And then you can, of course, write your own actions and optionally share it with the community if you want. Of course, there's an actions toolkit that GitHub provides you to write your own actions if you're interested. And then I was going to talk about how to add an existing action, but it's actually really easy. So I'll just kind of show you in the demo in a bit. And then lastly, artifacts. Artifacts or IO is basically like the output of your job. So I mentioned you have all these jobs, but what if you want to like pass data in between the jobs, right? Or you just want to save the outcome of your workflow. So that's where artifacts come into picture. So remember that the steps of a job run on the same runner. So for the steps, you can do like very simple IO by just using the file system because they're all in the same file system, but that's not the case of jobs. That's why we need to talk about artifacts. Just calling out the default storage is 90 days. You can overwrite that if you're interested. And then you can also access the artifact. So you can access the artifacts within the UI, and I'll show that to you in a bit. Or you can do that programmatically using actions, which is what you need in your jobs, using these two actions, and it's very simple. All right, so let me show you the demo now, and that reminds me that I need to share this other screen. 1 second. I guess I can just do that. Okay. All right, we made it. Okay, so I have this, so I have this empty repository here. There's nothing much going on here, but I'm gonna go to the Actions tab, which is where I would see my workflows, which currently don't exist. And GitHub is, welcoming you very warmly to create workflows here. So I'm just gonna pick the simple workflow, and this is the starter workflow that I was talking about earlier. So basically, GitHub gives you this like template workflow that is actually already a complete workflow. So let's just quickly go through it. All right, so there's a comment here. This is a basic workflow to help you get started with actions. The name is CI, which stands for continuous integration. Don't worry about what that means yet. We'll talk about that briefly later. And then here you have the events that we talked about. So the on keyword declares the events that you're interested in. So here we're interested in pushes to the master branch and pull requests to the master branch. And then this keyword here is an event that indicates that you can also run this workflow via the UI. So as expected, here are the jobs and steps. There's a single job here. That's the case of most of the workflows, I think. They're usually pretty simple, actually. So the single job here is called build. It runs on the latest version of Ubuntu. And then here are the steps. So first we go ahead and use a GitHub provided action that checks out your repository. You'll see this in pretty much all GitHub Actions workflows. And then there's a couple of other steps that do like very simple things, like just echo hello world. So just like print hello world and then echo a couple of other lines. That's about it. And it's actually complete. I don't need to do anything. And I'm just going to call it, leave it with that name. And if I can scroll to the right, which apparently I cannot, that is interesting. I can potentially commit that. All right. That is right. Maybe. Wait. Where is it?
All the way down.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, so start commit. All right, so I'm gonna create a new branch and just commit it there. And so, okay, create the pull request. And so now I just want to show you that the action will get triggered because I did say that I'm interested in pull request events. So now there goes my action. It's orange right now because it's running. It'll be done in just a second because it's not doing anything other than printing hello world. And there you go. So now you can access the action or the workflow outcome from the details here, or you can do that by just going to the Actions tab. And I'm going to show you the Actions tab because I just want to show you also this UI. So I cannot, part of the UI is cut out here, but basically you can see all of your workflows on the left here, which unfortunately is not showing here. But we have only one workflow, and then this is the run. This is one run of that workflow. And then you have a bunch of other controls here, like you can see the workflow file, and then you can click on this and then see the outcome of your run. There's a visualization graph here that unfortunately we see only a little part of, but this graph can be helpful if you have really complicated workflows, like it shows you all of your jobs and then the dependencies between them. Here it's painfully simple because we only have one thing. But yeah, that can be helpful. And then by clicking on build, we have basically everything, like all of the steps that executed in this workflow, and you recognize our little steps, run a one-line script, check out, etc. And then you can expand and have more details there. All right, I wanted to show you one more thing. So I want to create actually another workflow. So I'm going to go to new workflow. I'm always going to start with this because it's pretty simple. And here I'm going to I want to show you an example of uploading an artifact. So I'm going to quickly just delete all the comments here because that's just too much. And then I'm not interested in triggering that workflow via the UI, so I'll delete that too. Delete all of this stuff. Okay, so name is no longer continuous integration thing, but I'm just going to call it upload. I'm interested in doing this whenever there is the creation of an issue. If I can type issues, create. And then just remove all of that. That makes me realize I'm not sure I can. Okay. All right, so job. So still have one job. I'm going to call it upload. It's no longer building. It doesn't matter where it runs. And then the steps here, I'm just going to keep this one. And I did want to add another action. But I realized I cannot find that. There is a UI here to the right that allows you to pick actions. But I need to find out how to show you that. So give me one moment. Maybe it's at the bottom here. Oh, no, it's not. Sorry. Why does it?
Command minus to zoom out.
Ah, thanks. Okay, I'm not sure what that was weird. Okay, but is it still visible? Hopefully.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, so here you have this very helpful window here where you can select an action that can be GitHub provided or community provided. So I can just type upload, and there is an action here that allows me to upload a build artifact. So I'm just going to click that. And this is very cool, actually. You can select which version you're interested in. I'm just going to grab the latest, and I'm going to copy that, and then you literally just copy paste that. And that's what I meant by piece of cake earlier, because it is. So yeah, it's kind of annoying. I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong, but the indentation is you have to fix the indentation. So I'm going to remove some of these optional parameters that you're passing into the action. So I'm just going to remove all of that. And okay, don't care about that. So there you go. So that's my that's my action that I added. And then these are the the sort of the input parameters to your action. You can think of it like that. And you can see that it's complaining because the path must be provided. So what is the path that I want to give to this action to upload? Well, I need to first create a file, right? So I'm just going to say, you know, like, write something. Write something. And then here I'm just going to say, you know, echo like I into a file called file.txt. And then here I can say, well, the path is just file.txt because remember that between steps, we are just using the same file system. So just access that file. And so that should work. So I'm just going to commit this, change, create the pull request, and then my other action will kick in, but I don't care about that one yet. I mean, I don't care about that one right now. So that's now merged. And if I go into my actions tab, I can see that the upload workflow is now showing up. And then let's trigger that. So let's create a new issue, call it test, submit the new issue. And so now I should have a run of my new workflow, which is test. And if I can scroll to the bottom, annoying. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Now you can see the artifact that we uploaded, and then you can click on that, and there you go. So basically, you can have the file that we uploaded. All right. Let me now share my. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to the presentation. So bear with me 1 second until I can pull that back up. Where did that go even? I'm not sure where that went. Sorry. Sorry, this is not ideal, but. Okay. All right, so that was a demo. Now, yeah, what can you actually use GitHub Actions in your research might be something that you might be wondering for at this point. Okay, 1 second, sorry. Gosh, this is so annoying. I'm just gonna go from. Okay, so one of the main use cases of GitHub Actions is continuous integration. So I briefly mentioned that earlier, but if you don't know, in a nutshell, so why do you need continuous integration? And what it is that you basically want to just keep your repository as up to date as possible. So you want to push, you want to commit and push your code as frequently as possible to avoid bugs and merge conflicts. So that's kind of like the idea behind that. And why do you want to automate continuous integration? Well, in general, I guess you want to automate as many things as possible so you don't end up with the problem that Charlie Chaplin was having on that first slide. But like more concretely, do you actually want to go out and check out your repository and run all of your tests on different platforms with different OS versions and different Python versions manually every single time you push your repository? I don't think so. And even if you do, you should not do that because that's bad. Because you'll probably make a mistake, so don't do that. So continuous integration workflows help you automate a continuous integration tasks. So do basically all of that and potentially more. So you can also like prettify your code like by running linters, or you can run code coverage and whatever other things you want to do before you check in code to your main branch. Of course, GitHub has a plethora of starter continuous integration workflows, which are those template workflows I talked about. GitHub will even scan or analyze your code, scan your code, and depending on the language you're using, it will suggest a specific starter workflow that is that is up to the language that you're using. And then here I'm giving an example, but unfortunately it's a pain to show examples. So I will try and see what happens. Actually, yeah, maybe you can just. Okay, I guess that worked. Yeah, so here I'm showing you the our workflows or the action tab for our SCVI tools repository. And here you can see that we have one workflow and all of the runs of that workflow, of which there's a ton. And then I'm just going to click on one to show you, on one that failed, to show you that, well, I'll show you what I'm trying. So here, the visualization graph that I was pointing to earlier is a little bit more, I mean, it's still not like very, very simple, but you can see that it's like, it's showing that it's a matrix, so you can click on that and it will show you the different builds within that matrix. I think this visualization graph most of the time is actually pretty simple for most of the workflows that I'll show today, at least, but it can be pretty helpful, so take my word on that. Okay, and then I can click on this build that failed, and then I wanted to show you that it very neatly points to like what failed and why, and then you have more than enough information to debug. You can even show timestamps, I think with one of these little thingies there. So it's like very, very helpful and very, very easy. I'm not gonna, yeah. Or maybe I'll show you the workflow file really quickly. Oh, I don't have that here. Yeah, so that's our workflow file that's like, well, it's a little bit long, but it's pretty simple. I'll go through it very quickly in the interest of time, but so we're interested in pushes to the master branch and then another release branch and pull requests to the same branches. We have a single build job. Yes, we have a single build job that runs on the latest version of Ubuntu. We have a timeout minute thing. And then here is the matrix I was talking about. So we want to run everything on different versions of Python. And then the steps, as usual, you have the checkout action. Then we have a bunch of steps that just like prepare for the run. So like set up Python, cache, install whatever we need to install, run linters, formats, do all kinds of like prettyfying steps, and then test, code coverage. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, that's kind of like an example of a continuous integration type of a workflow. Great. Oh, okay, I did not want to go full screen, but that's okay. I'll go full screen. Shift this tab. All right. Yeah, so the next example I want to talk about is not a continuous integration example, but it's, I guess it can be helpful to some of us. So the idea here is to publish a Jupyter or build a Jupyter book from Jupyter Notebooks and then publish it to a website. So like it can be a GitHub Pages website, for example, and then keep it up to date using GitHub Actions. So let me click on this and show you the repository and the example. So here, Valentine has a repo where he has a couple of Jupyter notebooks that have like single cell data and analysis and graphs, like that kind of stuff. And what he wants to do is that he wants to compile that into a Jupyter book and then host it at this website. So this is basically the same content as in the Jupyter notebooks, but oh yeah, thank you. But on this website, that's a GitHub Pages website. All right. So how did he? Well, I mean, you can do that manually, but with a GitHub workflow, you can do that in an automated way. So like every time you go and update your Jupyter notebook files, your website will start to be automatically up to date. So let's take a quick look at the workflow that actually Adam put together. It's again pretty simple workflow. So it gets kicked off on every push to the master branch and also on a schedule. So this is an example of a workflow that gets run on a automatic like schedule, on the time-based schedule. What this means is just, I think, first day of every week at 1 p.m., just basically like once weekly. And then this job, as the comment indicates, build the dependencies, the book, and then it pushes it to the GH Pages branch on this repository. That's the source for that website I just showed you. So again, like you will always see that. Check out the repository, install dependencies, build, and then this is an example of a community provided action that's provided by this account. And by default, it will push your build artifacts to this GH pages branch. This is also very, very helpful and pretty commonly used action. Yeah, that's, I think, all I wanted to show on that one. Oh, I guess I also wanted to show the Actions tab to basically where we can see the workflow that we just talked about. And then there is another workflow that I believe this one is just added by GitHub Pages. So if you have it set up like this, you might see another workflow created. I think GitHub Pages recently made this change, so don't worry about this one. Yeah. So I'll share this tab instead. And then another helpful thing, or another another thing that you might want to do using GitHub Actions is it's kind of a contrived example, I guess, but I thought it's interesting. So this person has, I guess I can just show you it. So basically, they have a README that shows a plot, like that shows a graph, and then they want to keep that graph up to date every time the content that generates that graph is updated on their repository. So these are all like very similar ideas, right? So so there you go. That's the README, and then that's the graph I was talking about. And then this graph is generated using data that they push into like different folders here. Right? So and then they don't want to go and like manually generate the graph every time and update the README, so they write a workflow. That's, I think, actually also pretty simple. So yeah, so on every push, they go ahead and they run these steps. But an interesting thing that you might have noticed is that they have this this further sort of filtering, which is what I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, is that you can access the properties of the event object. So here they're looking at the name of the message, or the content of the message of the commit. And they're only executing this if the commit was called initial commit, which between brackets, this is kind of weird. Like, don't do this, because then, I mean, you have to call your commits initial commit in order for this workflow to trigger. So I'm not sure that's best practices, but yeah. So close brackets on that. So steps, as usual, check out your repository. Then they need to set up R because they're running R script. And then, like, pretty straightforward, actually. And then just commit your results into this folder, which is this PNG is basically what they use in their README. So now their README is kind of kept up to date automatically. And if you go into the Actions tab, you can see the workflow. And then, you see these initial commits every once in a while, which is not great, but they have to do that because that's how their workflow runs. Yeah, so that's kind of another thing that you can do using GitHub Actions. Share that tab again. Okay, and then I think this is, the last example I wanted to show you is kind of similar to the Valentine's example, but well, slightly different, I guess. So basically, this person, they have LaTeX files that they want to keep up to date. They want to keep like the PDF up to date and accessible at a permanent URL location. And I believe that you can do that with Overleaf, but you can also do that with GitHub Actions. Like there might be certain things that you can do with GitHub Actions that you cannot do that with Overleaf. So specifically in this case, it's a URL that your collaborators can just like navigate to, and then they can see like the PDF without making any edits to the thing. They just wanna see the PDF. So the idea is that they use GitHub Actions workflow to compile their text files and then push the artifacts, that IO thing that we talked about earlier, to a branch, which is then used as a source for the site that's hosting the paper. So kind of very similar ideas you might have noticed here. So, and then, yeah, I'm just calling out here that you can even have it be emailed to you, because there's an action for that. There is an action for pretty much anything. Let's have a look. Okay, So without going into too much detail, this is actually a template that they're providing. I think it's actually pretty cool. So since it's a template, you can create a new repository based on this template, and then they provide, I think these are templates for like different, what is it called? Like how you want to organize your paper, like different templates for how you want to actually write your paper. And then they're explaining that you can use those templates, move what you wanted to draft, and then this is where you would actually write your paper. That's like just explaining kind of how the repository is put together. But more interestingly, this is kind of where the paper would show up. So like this URL would be where the paper is always kept up to date. And I mean, there's like nothing in this one, but that's kind of how it would look at the end. And so let's take a look at their workflow. I promise this is the last workflow we're looking at. So this one is pretty long because of just LaTeX stuff, but it's again very simple. So on every push, this workflow is triggered. This one actually has two jobs. You can see paper and deploy, and you can even add other paper jobs if you want to build like multiple of your papers and deploy multiple of them. So the first one checks out your repository as usual, install LaTeX stuff. I'm just going to go very fast. I cannot read. Oh yeah, then he just like moves around things on the file system. And this is the kind of the potentially interesting part, is that they upload that as an artifact, which is what we saw earlier. And that artifact is what the deploy job uses, using the download artifact action, which should be here. Right? So now we have the artifact, and then we just move it to the right location and then deploy it on a branch using the same action that we saw earlier. And that branch is then used as the source for the site that hosts the PDF. Yeah, I think that's kind of about it. Here you can see the workflow, and it runs as usual. Let's see. Yeah, so I wanted to thank Adam Gayoso for your valuable feedback and suggestions. And pretty much like most of the material that I presented to you just comes from the official GitHub Actions website. They have very comprehensive guides. So yeah, don't hesitate to consult that if you want to go further. And then, yeah, thanks for listening.